protection. Armed fighting organisations were established in all of the factories in Riga. The workers took over Riga for a period of 3 months during the autumn. And in the countryside, there was a huge armed insurrection which killed the barons, burnt down the estates, and fought pitched battles against Russian troops.
That sounds a popular revolutionary programme to me.
Jacques was one of the main figures in this movement, and in fact you could say he was the military leader of the Latvian Revolution.
One of the things I'm interested in your research in Latvia, I think you managed to track down some members of Peter the Painter's family.
Yes, in 2003 I was involved in the London Weekend television programme on the Houndsditch murders, which received a lot of publicity in Latvia, because of course this story of the activities of Latvian anarchists in Europe was completely new to the Latvian audience, and I appealed during that publicity for anybody who could supply information about Jacques or could point me in the direction of his family to get in touch. From that appeal, somebody did actually get in touch with me, and I did manage to trace some of the descendants of the Jacques family, including 2 granddaughters, one of the granddaughter of Janusz Jacques' brother, and also another woman who was the daughter of one of his the granddaughter of one of his sisters.
And how did they take the revelation they were related to a notorious anarchist?
They were rather surprised. What they knew about their relative was that he was a revolutionary. He had been an important figure in the revolution, but in 1906 had gone abroad to America, and that was the last they'd heard about him.
And what do we know of Peter the Painter? What happened to Peter the Painter later on?
Well, the last confirmed report in the police files was that he was living in Germany in 1912. But my information, which I'm still following up, is that in 1913 he emigrated to Australia, that he stayed there, and with the proceeds of expropriations in Europe actually became a successful businessman in Australia.
Oh, what a disappointment.
But that's a chapter of the book which is still under investigation.
Well, this couldn't be the same that Inspector Leeson claimed to have bumped into him on a train.
No,
that was just pure
Leeson's
fanciful.
account is completely fanciful.
Yeah. There's some other interesting offshoots. I think Nina Vasileva, who was one of ththose arrested, an associate of the participants in the Siege of Sidney Street, lived on in London to a ripe old age,
Yes,
didn't she?
Vasileva was one of the defendants in the subsequent trial of people accused of being involved in Houndsditch, and she remained in the East End, living in a little room in Brick Lane, and she died in 1963.
No one ever managed to get to her to talk about it, or did she not want to, you think?
One journalist did interview her in 1961 and offered to take her to see the Jimmy Sangster's film about the Siege of Sidney Street, which was on at the cinema up the road, but understandably she declined the offer.
And did you do any research in the Met Police archives? Were they helpful, or is that just the sort of stuff in the Black Museum at Leman Street?
No, all the original case files are in the custody of the Guildhall Library in the City of London, and the material that those case files contain are in the files of the Riga police, which I've examined in Latvia.
Right. And obviously one of the big anarchists in London at the time was Errico Malatesta. I think attempts were made to try and associate him with the anarchists at Sidney Street. What do you think, looking now Malatesta's not going to be charged with anything, you can speak freely. Did Malatesta have any connection?
Malatesta's connection with the group was that the dead anarchist Gardstein had used his workshop in Islington to prepare the tools for the robbery. I think personally that Malatesta knew rather more than he admitted to the police, but rather wisely he said he just knew these individuals as political refugees.
Smart move. Another interesting anarchist who was in London near the time was Serge Bonneau of the notorious Bonneau gang in France, who did similar expropriations around about the same time, and I think was acting as chauffeur maybe for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. There's no evidence of a Bonneau connection. I
hadn't come across a connection. No, Bonneau was Conan Doyle's chauffeur until he returned to France to.
It's interesting that the Motherwell Bank job was the first politicised armed robbery. I think Bonneau was the first armed robbery with a getaway car.
Yeah.
And later Mario Buda in Wall Street was the first anarchist to use a car bomb. So anarchists obviously at the cutting edge of technology. Well, I mean, where do you place? There was expropriations done by different political groups all over Europe during those years. Where do you sort of place the Latvian anarchists in the context of those?
The tactic of armed expropriation was a widely spread tactic of the period when workers' movements couldn't pass the hats in pubs and do benefit gigs. They were simply expropriating the capitalists as they saw it.
If Billy Bragg had been around at the time, they wouldn't have needed to do expropriation.
No.
The anniversary is coming up soon. Oh, so you should say something about your book. Your book is not published yet. When do you hope to finally complete it and get it out?
Well, I'd like to have the book out for the centenary of the Houndsditch murders in 2010.
And do you think are you searching for a publisher now? Is there anything our readers can help, listeners can help with?
No, I will be securing a publisher between now and then.
I imagine there's going to be an avalanche of stuff in 1911 around Sidney Street, some heritage plaques going up. I think there's a couple of buildings around Sidney Street that bear some relation to Peter the Painter.
There's a block of flats in Sidney Street called Siege House, and I believe another one called Peter's House. There used to be a pub in Sidney Street called the Artichoke that had Peter's Bar in it, displaying pictures of the Siege of Sidney Street. So it entered into London folklore, really.
Yeah, I read one account that the Guardstein gang used to walk down the middle of Whitechapel High Street, all dressed like peacocks. And the reason they were asked why they walked down the middle of the high street because they said they feared assassination by Tsarist agents, but also they used to fence, the local villains used to fence stuff for them, so there was some integration with
they had contact with the criminal fraternity because, of course, the Houndsditch robbery wasn't an example where things went wrong, but actually things went right more often, and they were active in England England and Scotland for at least 2 years prior to Houndsditch.
And briefly, did they have any connection with English anarchists, or was it all sort of foreign emigre anarchists?
They kept themselves very much to themselves, and really any connections they had were generally with the exiled movement.
Yeah. Okay, Phil, that's absolutely fascinating that we now know at last who Peter the Painter was. Thank you very much for that. I'm sure there'll be an avalanche of inquiries. So that concludes the first one in the Anarchism in the UK series. Next week, I'll be talking to John Retty, who was editor of Freedom in the 1960s, a well-known poet and active anarchist for over 40 years in this country, a fund of stories, and is able to take us through many episodes in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right up to the present time in English anarchism. So I hope you'd all tune back in next week to hear the second interview in the series, Anarchism in the UK.